Welcome to the Elvis Presley Channel. Couples can start with a memorable moment that rivals any Hollywood movie. However, it's totally up to chance whether things stay that way. Priscilla and Elvis Presley became a legendary couple, but their marriage was not without its difficulties. That arrived in the form of AnnMargret Olsen, a Swedish actress. Despite his best efforts, Presley did not remain faithful to Priscilla. In reality, he was well known for having affairs. AnnMargret was a well-known example whom he met while working on set for a song. She realized, though, that things had to come to an end. However, when the time came, AnnMargret was prepared for the next step. Why, AnnMargret knew she had to break up with Elvis. Before we move forward with this video, do well to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Now let's get back to the reason you are here in the first place. How it all began. Except for a grand piano, the MGM soundstage was nearly empty. The only sound was the echo of heels on the smooth wooden floor, which could be heard from a few technicians hauling equipment back and forth in the corner. Photographers started clicking shots of AnnMargret and Elvis Presley as they approached each other, clearly anticipating an historic moment for the studio. Viva Las Vegas, a phenomenal musical smash, was being developed at the time. Elvis met his co-star for the first time. "Elvis Presley, I'd like you to meet a great young lady named AnnMargret," George Sidney said in a fateful introduction. "This is Elvis Presley, AnnMargret." "The importance was lost on Elvis and me," AnnMargret wrote in a book. "I extended my hand and he softly shook it." According to her book, the two got off to a humorous start. "We said at the same time, 'I've heard a lot about you,' which made us chuckle and broke the ice." The rumours began to circulate almost immediately after their enthusiastic greeting, and they weren't without merit. Even though Presley was supposed to marry Priscilla, the two had an affair. This was something that both parties were very aware of. That encounter would start a good working relationship between AnnMargret and Elvis Presley, which would eventually turn romantic, with the set of Viva Las Vegas serving as the backdrop for one of Hollywood's most spectacular on-set love affairs. AnnMargret met Elvis Presley on the set of Viva Las Vegas in July of 1963, when she was 22 and he was 28. When Elvis Presley met his co-star, he was already a well-known actor with 14 films under his credit. AnnMargret, on the other hand, had only recently begun her career. Bye Bye Birdie's star, Elvis Presley was well aware that he'd won the hearts of practically every lady he'd ever met. He'd even managed to capture the hearts of females he'd never met, by being every housewife's late-night fantasy in America. On the other hand, AnnMargret had not expected to fall in love with him. Before principal photography began, she and Elvis were brought to a recording studio to record their solo numbers for the film. As they cycled through their different repertoire, singing takes after take after take, their minds presumably strayed back to their first meeting in the darkness of MGM studios. Then, on July 11th, Elvis and Margaret got into the same small studio to record 3 duets, "The Lady Loves Me," "You're the Boss," and "Today, Tomorrow and Forever," starting something that would continue to smoulder as principal photography began, and they travelled to Las Vegas. Their courtship started in earnest. Initially, Elvis and I might have conceded that the only heat between us came from the blazing desert sun, AnnMargret reportedly recounted. But as the days progressed, it became evident that the co-stars were besotted with one another. As one AP put it, between takes they disappeared into his dressing room. They had a private lunch together. Elvis and AnnMargret fell in love right away, discovering in one another all they needed in themselves. Everything they enjoyed about life was reflected in them, as if they had both wandered into a hall of mirrors and decided to make it their home, whether it was a love of music, a passion for motorcycles, or a commitment to God. Even when they danced, they were perfectly aligned. When Elvis drove his pelvis forward, mine banged forward as well. When his shoulder dropped, I was down there with him. When he whirled, I was already on my heels, AnnMargret explained. They were completely open and honest with one another, and they soaked it up for as long as they could. During the making of Viva Las Vegas, AnnMargret discovered Elvis Presley's enormous ego. Elvis thought the director, George Sidney, was favouring his co-star by giving her good camera angles. He was correct in several aspects. Even though it meant that Elvis had to take a back seat on occasion, it was clear that George Sidney had favoured Ann-Margret's danceability in the final cut. Despite the outcry, Hound Dog's vocalist found a reason to swallow his pride. It's clear from the final cut of Viva Las Vegas that Elvis had the most musical exposure. He had 6 solo songs compared to Ann's 2. Margaret's dancing skills were highlighted, but Viva Las Vegas comes off as an Elvis Presley film, with Ann-Margret as the powerful leading lady. Ann-Margret was not named in any of the pro-Presley claims as a victim of the director's apparent favouritism, and she did not address the issue in her book. In the camera angle incident, Elvis's professional jealousy did not spill over into his relationship with Ann-Margret. It quickly escalated into a full-fledged love affair, according to all reports. Lamar Fike claimed, Elvis's affair with Ann-Margret was more than an affair, he was completely enamoured with her. Ann-Margret stated, there were other elements in Elvis's life that pulled him apart from me, and I was able to comprehend them. Her thoughts turned to Priscilla. The king was anticipated to marry Priscilla in the future. The press put a lot of pressure on Elvis's commitment, and he received a lot of flack for it. Elvis admitted everything and returned to her completely, according to Priscilla's autobiography, Elvis and Me. Elvis had always been honest with me, Ann-Margret remembered, but it was still a complicated scenario. We continued to see each other regularly until we had dated for over a year, she says. Then everything came to a halt. The film Viva Las Vegas, which introduced the two, was completed in 1963. Neither of them was married, Marty Lacker added, and they cared a lot about each other, but Priscilla returned to Graceland. In her autobiography, Ann-Margret, for example, avoided addressing her deep love for Elvis and instead focused on the motorbike trips and other adventures they shared as close friends. Even so, it's clear that their close relationship persisted long after the filming of Viva Las Vegas was completed. Jerry Schilling said in his book that in the fall of 1964, Ann-Margret entered Elvis's California home late at night with her key and made her way up to Elvis's bedroom. She used to write him letters and sign them Bunny or Thumper, Marty Lacker claims. She'd also contact Graceland and give them the same code. Elvis knew she adored pink and had given her a round pink bed in a moment of affection. When the filming of Viva Las Vegas concluded, Elvis continued to send letters, flowers and costly gifts to Ann-Margret. Their romance, on the other hand, ended abruptly in 1967. According to Ann-Margret, their love affair had to come to an end sooner or later. In her memoirs, she claimed, Elvis had always been honest with me, but the situation was still baffling. We kept seeing one another regularly until we'd been dating for more than a year. We realised the relationship had to terminate, and Elvis had to stick to his word. He married Priscilla in Las Vegas on May 1st, 1967. Ann-Margret took similar action when she married actor Roger Smith a year later in the same city. For the following 10 years of Elvis's life, he and Ann-Margret remained close friends. When she made her first performance on the Las Vegas stage in June 1967, Elvis sent her a guitar-shaped floral arrangement. He used the strategy for all of her Las Vegas openings for the rest of his life. Ann-Margret was in the audience when Elvis opened at the International Hotel on July 31st, 1969, according to Lamar Fike. They would go to each other's Las Vegas shows whenever they could in the 1970s and visit afterward. In the 1970s, both would suffer from addictions. While Elvis was on prescription medication, Ann-Margret battled drinking. I got to a point where my days and nights blurred into one continuous fuzzy state of inebriation, she continued. I'd drink a fifth of scotch, pass out, wake up, drink more, and pass out again, she says. There were times when I couldn't recall what I was doing. Elvis, on the other hand, was unable to conquer his addiction. Elvis's bad health was initially brought to her attention in early 1977. Why did Ann-Margret know she had to break up with Elvis? While co-starring in the 1964 film musical Viva Las Vegas, as earlier stated, Elvis Presley and Ann-Margret famously had a passionate romance. Elvis and Ann-Margret continued to have affection for each other even after they had married. They only dated for about a year when Elvis had already promised marriage to Priscilla Presley. Their friendship lasted until Elvis Presley died. Elvis's earlier pledge to Priscilla, who was already living at Graceland, was one of the reasons he ended his romance with Ann-Margret. However, several people in Elvis's life believed that his co-star's ambition turned him off as well. Although the King of Rock and Roll was unusual in many respects, his view on gender roles in partnerships were generally labelled as traditional and old-fashioned. Ann-Margret, on the other hand, was a rising star when she met Elvis. She was completely focused on her success. According to Sonny West, Elvis's former bodyguard, Elvis thought that in love relationships, women should be submissive to males and not put their jobs first. He saw women first as spouses and mothers, and didn't expect them to put anything else, including their freedom or work, ahead of their men. In his 2007 memoir, Elvis, Still Taking Care of Business, West stated, "As a son of the Deep South, Elvis had clear beliefs about what his wife's duty should be. It wasn't even a lead role. That was just for him." Elvis, according to Linda Thompson and Anita Wood, could be quite old-fashioned at times. Elvis Presley was not the only one who claimed that he had a unique perspective on women's roles. Over the years, Priscilla has said that Elvis can be domineering when it comes to her looks and behaviour. When Priscilla was approached on a movie set about pursuing a career in Hollywood, Elvis supposedly turned down the offer right away. Paramount Pictures offered Anita Wood, who dated Elvis Presley from 1957 to 1962, a 7-year contract. However, Elvis contacted her on one of her first days in Los Angeles and urged her to come home, which she agreed to. In her 2016 memoir, A Little Thing Called Life, Linda Thompson, Elvis's girlfriend from 1972 to 1976, said that she was unsure about marrying the king because she didn't want to end up in the wife penalty box. She commented on Elvis's restrictions on a wife's role in his life. "He told me that the women didn't go on tour and that they usually only got to go to the Vegas engagements for the opening and or closing shows. You don't bring your wife to work with you," he used to say, so the spouses stayed at home while the girlfriends went on a trip. On the set of Viva Las Vegas, Priscilla also stated that Elvis felt competitive with Ann-Margret. Some people in Elvis's life stated that he was jealous of the attention showered on Ann-Margret on the set of Viva Las Vegas, in addition to his more traditional notions on how men and women should behave in relationships. Priscilla stated in her 1985 memoir, Elvis and Me, that Elvis told her all hell had broken loose on the shoot. While Elvis and Ann-Margret were not in direct competition, Elvis and his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, were unhappy that Ann-Margret was receiving so much attention. "I've got some crazed director hopelessly in love with Ann," Elvis said at the time, according to Priscilla. "You'd swear it was her movie the way he's directing it. In all the goddamn close-up shots he's favouring her. Not only that, but they want her to join me in singing some of the songs. Colonel 'bout broke a circuit breaker. I told them they'd have to pay me more if they wanted me to sing alongside her." Ann-Margret and Elvis may have split up because she pursued her own goals. While Elvis and Ann-Margret briefly considered marriage, they broke up after roughly a year of dating. Elvis's vow to Priscilla was undoubtedly a factor in his split from Ann-Margret, but West argued that his stated desire to be in charge of his relationships and to be the unquestioned star also played a role. In his memoir, West writes, "I do not doubt that Elvis loved Ann, but he understood deep down that she would never, and apparently so, take second place in his work. Nobody knew it better than Elvis that Ann was going to be a huge star in her own right." In 1967, Ann-Margret married Roger Smith 1 week after Elvis married Priscilla. In 1973, Elvis and Priscilla divorced, but Ann-Margret married Smith for 50 years until his death in 2017. Until the King's untimely death, Elvis and Ann-Margret maintained a particular bond. Now it's your turn. Do you think their relationship could have stood with all these reasons on the ground? The bond between Elvis Presley and Ann-Margret was a very unique one, as you may have noticed. that they had to break up is a huge tragedy in their lives. Watch this video and find out why AnnMargret will never recover from Elvis's death.